So let's talk about the sugar diet. The sugar diet essentially is what I've been talking about mostly, which is a raw fruitarian diet. There are two main schools of thought when it comes to the sugar diet, right? So you have like a sugar diet, and then you have a sugar fast, right? The sugar diet is essentially a diet where all of your food choices primarily are just carbohydrate, sugar rich foods, fruit basically. Um, the way that some people talk about it, all sugar's on the table: fruits, fruit juice, candy, right? As long as there's no fat in it, right? Or very marginal, minimal fat, right? And basically, you just have these sugary foods throughout the day, right? And you eat until you're full. So you can really load up on these sugary foods. And then towards the end of the day, you move from your fruits and into more of like your starchy foods: rice, potatoes, some legumes, some leafy green vegetables, things like this, right? Essentially, like a high raw fruitarian diet. For whatever reason, people just decide to start calling it a sugar diet, which is quite amusing to me, right? The sugar fast is basically like a raw fruitarian diet, essentially, right? Where it's a diet where it's all just fruits and leafy greens. Not even really any nuts and seeds. It's just fruits and leafy greens. Some people they don't even eat the leafy greens, which I don't know about all of that, right? It's a bit overboard, right? Um, but basically that's what a sugar fast is, right? It's kind of weird to call it a sugar fast because essentially sugar breaks a fast, but okay, fine, right? A sugar fast. In the same way that people would refer to a juice fast. A sugar fast essentially could be a juice fast, right? If you're just taking fruits and juicing them. So that's pretty much how that works, right? But essentially, it's just a rebranding of what I've been talking about a raw fruitarian diet or a high raw fruitarian diet. That's essentially what the deal is. Um, so why has this become such a big thing? And is this like a real thing? Is this like a viable, legitimate thing? It is, but it depends on how you go about it, right? And people are learning, right? I would like to think I've contributed to that because a lot of people are actually kind of sounding like me recently. You have like a lot of people who are emphasizing, hey, sugar for weight loss and sugar for diabetes, right? Basically, if you have a diet where it's centered around sugar or just carbohydrate rich foods, where basically the food is just exclusively carbs, what they call sugar, people are starting to talk more about how this improves insulin sensitivity pretty dramatically. This is a very good way of decongesting your liver, right? This is a very good way of dropping body fat. Right? This is a very good way of helping to reverse kidney disease and improve blood pressure and things like that. Now, of course, the results vary depending on what foods you eat. Right? So there's a big difference between getting your sugar from fruits versus getting your sugar from candy or things like this, right? So essentially, if all of your food sources are all just predominantly water and carbs or water and sugar, and you're keeping out the protein and the fat, right? Or overt proteins, overt fat. When I say overt, meaning like something that is, it is the dominant component in it is fat, or the dominant component in it is protein. So, for example, the dominant component in, let's say, chicken breast is protein, or the dominant energy source in an avocado is fat, right? And so that dominance is what people refer to as an overt form, right? So if you cut out the protein and the fats and you just focus on the carbs, essentially what this does is this points your metabolism in one direction, and you optimize for one specific pathway, and that is carbohydrate metabolism. So you're leaning all the way into deploying insulin and improving the way your body handles sugar or glucose, right? typically if you eat like a well-rounded kind of balanced diet where like you're getting an even amount of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, where it's not really lopsided, the macros are pretty even, like 30 and change, 30 something percent, 37 percent, 37%, something like this, right? Where you try to balance all of them. What happens is you get a mix of, when you eat, you get a mix of foods that increase glucagon, which are your dietary fats and proteins. And then you get foods like your carbohydrates that increase insulin. And so basically, when you're eating fats and protein, both of these hormones are increasing together, right? So your pancreas is releasing glucagon and insulin together. Now, if you're insulin sensitive, you don't really have like insulin resistance issues and metabolic issues, fatty liver, and all that type of stuff. Doing that could be, there's not really much of a negative side effect of doing that, because these hormones are not just shooting up big time on you, right? You get a moderate rise. And so there's a balance between these two, right? Is that an optimal way to eat? Not necessarily, but it is more of like a normal kind of thing that we're used to, right? This is a thing that we were indoctrinated into, like as a child, right? So that just seems normal to me, like a balanced three-legged stool. Now, basically, if the glucagon is down and the insulin is up, your body adapts to all the carbohydrate consumption. So as you're fueling your body with just the glucose, your body adapts to that like it adapts to anything else, right? You eat a lot of fat, you get really fat adapted, to the point where your insulin's really low, your fasted blood sugar's really low, and then your glucagon and adrenal output is real high, right? And so you can drop a ton of weight and things like, you can drop a ton of weight. You can improve triglycerides and things like that, right? So there can be benefits to doing that, right? You just cut all your carbohydrates out. You reduce your protein to a more of a lower moderate form. And then you mainly just have like your dietary fats and leafy greens and things, a very low glycemic index, very low glycemic diet. And so you become more fat adapted. And so your body is more primed to really burn fat for energy through like, the ramping up and increase of lipolysis by deploying glucagon and tapping your adrenal glands to facilitate the increase in speed at which your body breaks down fat to use that for energy, right? Your body has to adapt to that. Otherwise, if your body doesn't increase the lipolysis and increase the adrenal output, you get fatigue, you get brain fog, you get kidney disease, you get fatty liver disease, you get increase in blood pressure, you get high triglycerides, and all that kind of stuff. So your body tries to protect you from that by ramping up the lipolysis so that the fat is being burned at a higher level so that you're not over accumulating it and getting overwhelmed with it, right? So your body, the only thing it's trying to do is just keep you alive. That's all it's trying to do. It's just trying to stay alive. And so your body will raise this hormone and lower this hormone and increase this enzyme and lower that enzyme and kick on this type of inflammation to signal this and that and whoop, 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 right? And your body basically does this in the pursuit of creating some type of homeostasis, some balance to adjust to whatever your most common habits are, right? The basis for human adaptation is basically adapting to your most common habits. Throughout the week, I do 60-minute one-on-one consultation calls. So this is a great opportunity for you to talk to me personally and get answers that are more tailored to what your biggest concerns and goals are, right? So in a call like this, we can cover training strategy, diet strategy, fasting strategy, and even mindset strategies, right, to improve your own personal psychology. So all you got to do is just go into the link in the description of this video, pick the day and time that works best for your schedule, and we'll talk soon. That's why consistency is so important, right? Now the inverse also happens with glucose, right? So people say, oh, so a keto diet, that works great, right? So I don't even necessarily have to do a high carb diet either. I could just do keto. You can. Problem is, with the keto thing, the longer you do it, you get diminishing returns. And a lot of people don't really do it effectively either. So with leaning into fats for energy and just really cutting out your carbs, your body can adapt to this over time, but the problem is that the body isn't really designed to run on fat perpetually for energy. right? So out of the 3 macros, you have carbohydrates, which is your primary source of energy. Everything in your body runs on sugar, right? Your brain, your nervous system just runs on sugar, right? And as a matter of fact, in order for your body to use fat for energy, it has to convert it into glucose. Otherwise, it just gets stored and just piles up in your body. All right. So basically, if you eat fats and carbs together, your body will store the fats and use the carbs for energy. And so basically, if you're eating a high amount of carbs and you're also pairing that with fats, if the fats are high enough, well, you just keep storing the fat you're eating. So you can end up gaining body fat, right? So with the sugar diet, it's basically like, all right, well, you know what? We'll just cut the fats out altogether. So therefore, we're just exclusively burning the carbs for energy. This doesn't really work long term for fats. And the reason why is because your body doesn't store fat in a wide variety of ways that it stores carbs, and it doesn't burn it that effectively either. It's just not really the ideal use of energy. It's an auxiliary form of energy that your body can tap into when there's no available carbs. There's a hierarchy. And your body doesn't really use, or your body's not supposed to use protein for energy. Protein is really meant to be the building blocks of new cells, right? Your body can store fat primarily in subcutaneous fat stores, visceral fat, and in your liver, right? 3 primary ways your body can store fat. Carbohydrates, your body can break down carbs into glucose, and you can store that glucose in the form of glycogen inside all of the lean tissues in your body, right? All of your skeletal muscle, and inside fat cells, and inside your liver. So your body has way more options and a capacity to store glucose. The same is not the case with fat. And as a matter of fact, if you store like more than 1% fat inside muscle tissue, that basically creates diabetes. It'll make you significantly more insulin resistant. It disrupts mitochondrial function big time. So this is the issue you run into, right? So basically the way that your body is set up is that if you eat a high amount of fat, it'll suppress your appetite to get you to stop eating. So your body goes, whoa, 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 too much, too much, too much. Will shut off your appetite, right? And then that glucagon really kicks on. What your body is essentially trying to do is force you to stop eating the fat, shut off your metabolism, well, not your metabolism, but shut off your appetite by suppressing ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, and increases leptin. That's when people are like, well, I eat fats, it keeps me fuller for longer. Yeah, because your body's trying to get you to stop eating in order to avoid getting like metabolic congestion and wrecking your health. This is your body defending you. Right? So you're like, oh, the fats are more satiating. And it's like, but that's a defense mechanism. This is your body manipulating your brain chemistry to get you to stop taking in more. And then the lipolysis kicks on, and then, that whole thing, you get more glucose from the fat. With carbohydrates, it's a completely different thing, because basically you can eat carbs with no restrictions. If your fats are low enough, you can eat carbs with no restrictions. You can't really do that with fat because your body doesn't have the capacity to store fat in that way. When I explain this to people, I say, now imagine like you're at a shopping mall and you bought a bunch of stuff, right? And then you're waiting on the checkout line. You want to check out, but there's several people in front of you. Back in the day, before like tap to pay and debit cards and credit cards and things like this and cash back rewards, all this, before all that, right? If you wanted to use like a bank card, there was like this machine where there was like a paper, there's like this carbon paper, and you put your card in it and you put the paper on top and they slide this metal thing across. And what it would do is it would use the carbon paper to basically copy the card number onto the paper, right? And then that paper would be the basis to be able to charge your card. Right? Now, this whole mechanical apparatus, this takes a lot longer than just swiping a card, right? So the line, it takes longer for the line to move because the checkout process takes longer because you go through these extra steps in order to be able to use that bank card, right? And then if it's cash, well, basically you give somebody cash, and what they got to do is receive the cash, do some math to know how much change to give you back. Right? And the person receives the cash, and then they count through it to make sure they gave them back the right amount of cash, and blah, blah, blah. This extends the checkout process. Now we got a card, and you're out. Right? Fats is like, if you have a diet that's relying on fats, that's like going through this extra long checkout process. And if the checkout process takes longer, then the line gets longer over time, because people are not checking out quicker than the line is growing. Right? So people are entering the line quicker than people are leaving the line. This is essentially what you run into when you have like a fat dominant keto diet or things like this. So this is the issue that a lot of people have. So they get the skyrocketing cholesterol, they get weird blood pressure issues, kidney issues, and things like this, right? Because it ends up leading to this metabolic congestion, right? Because people think like, oh, I can just eat fat unlimited, fat and protein unlimited. Doesn't work that way. Carbohydrates, it's different because it's like tap to pay. You take your card out, boop, or you don't even have to take your card out, which means you don't even need to reach into your wallet. You just take your phone, tap to pay, and you leave. Right? Scan your phone, boop, and walk out. Checkout process is done. No cash back, no swiping, no digging around for things, just in and out, right? So it moves the checkout line a lot quicker. So that line doesn't grow out of control, and the next thing you know, you have a line, running out the door of the store. Right? So that's essentially how your metabolism works. The biggest problem that people face when it comes to things like diabetes, fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, kidney disease, obesity, etc., it's a traffic jam. Right? Your body's not able to really utilize the resources quicker than they're taking them in. So you get this pile up. So should you do like a sugar diet? This is like a viable thing. I don't like calling it a sugar diet because it's not really actually what it is. Right? You're not just like getting a bag of sugar and just doing like tablespoons of sugar in the mouth and that's your meals. That's not it's a very crude way to describe this way of eating. A fruitarian diet, okay, is what they're really talking about. For whatever reason, they decided instead of just calling it fruitarian, they want to call it a sugar diet, right? Now, is this viable? Well, the answer is yes. This is my primary thing that I suggest to people. Have a fruit-dominant diet. Your diet doesn't have to be exclusively fruit, right? I personally don't really put people on fruit exclusive diets where you swear off everything and you only eat fruit. I don't really particularly make diet plans like that very often. If I do, it's going to be more so in the short term, right? I take a more conservative approach because I basically want to hit the full spectrum of nutrients that the body needs in order to maintain that balance. I don't want to necessarily lean in too aggressively in one direction, right? I don't really particularly want to do that, people, right? I'm all about risk mitigation and basically maximizing upside while reducing the downside as much as possible. So I'm more in favor of a high raw fruitarian diet. If you do it like that, that's when it becomes more viable long term, right? Because you can basically just have your fruits throughout the day, right? So you have your fruits in the morning, early morning, mid-morning, late morning, early afternoon, mid-afternoon. And then late afternoon is where you have your final meal of the day. That's where you get like more of your sweet potato, more of your chickpeas or pinto beans or black beans or lentils, your leafy green vegetables, your onion, bell pepper, garlic, herbs, spices, things like this, whole grains like basmati rice or quinoa, kasha. Throw some tofu in there if you want, this type of thing, right? So basically you carb up all throughout the day, carbs, carbs, carbs. And then you can have your fats in with your last meal of the day. So that's one way of doing it. However, when it comes to the fats with the last meal of the day, you don't want to go crazy with the fats in the last meal of the day either. All right? You don't want to go crazy. Just because you didn't have all the carbs and throughout the day, you didn't have any of the fats throughout the day doesn't mean you pile them on really heavy at the end. It's not like that. As a general rule for me, a good guideline is with your final meal of the day, if you haven't been eating any of your fats throughout the day, you can have like about anywhere from 25 to 45 grams of fat towards the end of the day, right, with that final meal. Right, so that's one option. But it depends on what your goal is. Right? You may want to narrow that down even more, where to the point where with that final meal, you only have maybe 30, 35 grams of fat with that meal. But the fat source itself matters, right? So for example, let's say if your fat source is like some type of nuts and seeds. So you're eating like whole nuts and seeds. Now, if you're eating whole nuts and seeds, the fat absorption can be a lot lower versus like if you ate an avocado where the fat absorption is a lot higher, right? Or you have that final meal of the day, that savory meal, and you put oil on it, where pretty much if it's just an oil, you get like 100% absorption from that. So the fat source matters. Is this fat source rich in omega-3 essential fatty acids? Is it rich in vitamin E? Is it rich in vitamin K? This kind of thing. So the fat source you pick does matter, right? So I'm not really partial to I don't really put oil in diet plans, because if you're going to put fat in your diet, it can be a much more beneficial source. So I would rather the fat source be something like peanuts or cashews or almonds or avocado or tofu, even though tofu is not necessarily high in fat, right? It's not really a fat-rich food necessarily. But it's a unique legume because it has more fats in it than typical legumes have, right? Hemp seeds. I'm a big fan of hemp seeds, right? So this kind of thing. So it depends. If you're a diabetic, I think with that final meal, you can have about 20, 25 grams of fat, maybe even 30 for that day. And I would cap it out at that. And then it depends on the overall size of the meal. Now, what you can also do is you can have all of your fruits and things like that early morning, mid morning, late morning, and then have your fruits early afternoon. And then mid afternoon, you have more like a starchy meal, right? Baked sweet potato, broccoli, chickpeas, this kind of thing, right? You have a meal like that. And then you have your fats separately at night, later in the evening. And that's where you can have like an avocado and an ounce of like sunflower seed kernels, for example. Right? And you have that separately from your other meals. And that would come, you would have those fats, let's say about an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours later after you've eaten all of your carbs for the day. It's another option. So it's a sugar diet, essentially, just with the fats tacked on to the day at the end before you go to bed. Right? So that's another option there to do it. Then the sugar fasting option. So let's say you do Monday is like a full day of eating, like I just described with the fruits, early morning, mid morning, early afternoon, and then starchy meal late afternoon, and then a couple hours after that you have like the avocado and the sunflower seed kernels. Boom, right? You can do that one day, and then the next 3 days it's just all fruits. All fruits and like leafy green vegetables. That's it. Fruits, leafy green vegetables throughout the day. Okay? No nuts and seeds, no starches, no none of that. Just the fruits. So Monday you have a full day of eating, and then you do what they call a sugar fast, which is basically just a raw fruitarian diet. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? Just the fruits. And then Friday, you have a day of eating that's similar to Monday. And then after that Friday, you repeat. And then you have your raw fruitarian days of eating, Saturday and Sunday, and then repeat back to Monday, full day of eating. That's actually what your week can look like. Or you can not obey the calendar at all, right? So you can do full day of eating Monday, fruitarian Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, full day of eating Friday, fruitarian or raw fruitarian, fully raw fruitarian, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then full day of eating Tuesday, and then fruitarian, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then repeat, right? One on, three raw, one on, three off. So there's a variety of different ways to do it. And then it depends on your training schedule. It depends on your goals. Are you trying to build muscle, or you just want to drop body fat as quickly as possible? Are you trying to reverse diabetes, right? Like, what's the goal? What is your goal, right? Do you want to reverse fatty liver disease, this type of thing, right? What's the goal? So that is pretty much in a nutshell what it would look like, right? So if you want to know what a sugar diet is, that's essentially what it is. They're just calling what I've been recommending. You're just calling it something else, right? But mine's a bit more nuanced because I'm more so focused on food choice and micronutrients. Um, so why is this becoming such a big thing? What's this about, right? Like people have been doing the whole raw fruitarian thing or the high raw fruitarian thing for years. I'm not the inventor of this. I've never claimed to be the person who originated this whole thing. I'm not at all. People have been doing like a raw fruitarian or a high raw fruitarian diet way before any of us were born, right? This way of eating has been around for thousands of years. This isn't new at all. So what's with the whole sugar diet fad thing and the rebranding? What's that about? Well, this is a response to the keto and carnivore diet because basically you had a keto diet. People were running that, and people started having all types of issues on a keto diet. It started going off the rails. People were having a lot of problems with it. Their cholesterol was blowing up on them. They were having liver issues, like elevated liver enzymes, and they were having kidney issues, heart palpitations, and chronic dehydration, low electrolytes, and then the weight was like they would, the weight loss was stagnant, and then when they went back to try to introduce carbs back into the diet, the weight would come back super quick, and they'd be gassy and bloated and all of this. And so basically, it was like people are realizing the keto diet kind of wrecked my metabolism. So where do I go now? Well, a lot of people, they said, let's double down. Let's move from a diet that is dominant in fat to a diet that is more so dominant in protein and fat, right? So then people said carnivore diet. So there was just meat all day, right? Meat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And some people were putting like eggs and milk and stuff, right? So it was like an acidic, kind of an acidic, funky diet, right? Milk and butter. People were eating sticks of butter and drinking a half gallon of milk and eating all kind of meat and animal testicles and liver and this and that. And, this started blowing up on people, right? And this started hitting people even worse than the whole keto diet thing. So a lot of people have been dropping off. A lot of people have been having health issues with it. Cholesterol up into the 300s, 400s, right? Heart palpitations, brain fog, fatty liver issues, right? Elevated liver enzymes, kidney issues, high bun creatinine levels in the kidneys, breaking out in rashes, skin issues, all types of stuff, body odor. It was getting ugly, right? Gas, constipation, diarrhea, and then undulating from diarrhea and constipation, diarrhea, constipation, diarrhea, constipation, diarrhea, constipation, right? Sitting on the toilet, fighting for your life, heart palpitations, dry mouth. It was just going off the rails, right? So now where do you go? What do you do? Man, those vegans, they may have a point. But those raw vegans, those raw fruitarians that we've been making fun of for the last several years, we want to follow some of their strategies and diet tips, but we want to call it something else. Can't call it a fruitarian diet. No, we're not gonna give those skinny, emaciated, weak, scrawny fruitarians any credit. We're not gonna do that. No. We're not gonna call it a fruitarian. We're not no raw vegan. No, we're not gonna do that. Let's call it a sugar diet. I don't know if people actually said this in their minds. I'm just kind of imagining like this was the thought process behind the scenes. I don't have any evidence for that at all, right? But I just see the patterns and whatnot. Even if nobody's going to admit that anyway, even if I was like dead on with that. But just looking at the trend, because I'm like, this is a little too close. Where it's like, oh, what are you eating today? Well, I'm eating fruits and juicing and blah blah. All right, yeah, it's just fruits, just fruits. So this is what happens. So basically, the pendulum has swung. Reality is a stubborn thing, right? Universal law, it's very powerful. Universal law always has the final say. And, look, human beings are going to have to capitulate to universal law. And you had a certain subset of human beings that were saying, hey, we're apex predators, we're carnivores, we're lions, tigers, and bears, right? We're the kings of the jungle. And that's why when we go to the grocery store, we buy a carton of milk, burgers, packs of cheese, chicken breasts, chicken legs, and like pork sausages and eggs. That don't seem too apex predator-ish to me, but okay. But at some point in time, a human being will have to learn they are not a lion, they are not a tiger, just a human being, right? I don't think you want to be a lion anyway, because there's certain behaviors that lions engage in and it gets real. And I mean lions, how they deal with each other, right? All of these apex predator men, I don't think you want to be out here fighting, literally getting into fights to the death to be able to mate with a woman and have a baby. I don't think you want to do that. Right? Where a woman just going to sit back and watch two dudes kill each other, and whoever comes out on top, well, that's whose baby I'm having, right? So, universal law, it sets in.